Hello everyone and welcome back to the Great Book of Grudges. My name is Nathan and I've been thinking a lot about the Dwarfs lately, mostly because they're next. The Thrones of Decay DLC is expected at some point this year and it's touching up the Nurgle faction, the Empire, and also the Dwarfs. And despite what's been happening with these DLCs, I'm choosing to look at a positive light and hope that the Dwarfs get their much needed attention, mostly because, let's be honest, they've had two reworks and they've been kind of awful. It's mostly due to the fact that the Dwarfs haven't really had a DLC since Warhammer 1, instead getting all their reworks in Warhammer 2 in the form of FLC, which meant that they weren't going to get that much attention. Now, the thing is, a really cool mechanic has come into place recently with Shadows of Change, which unfortunately meant it was for Kislev when, in all honesty, should have actually been for the Dwarfs. The Witch's Hut mechanic is pretty much just Dwarf and Runeforging, something that is very much attached to the Dwarf lore. Not only that, but it was a very popular thing in the tabletop. Yes, we do have runesmiths and we'll talk about them a little bit later. Obviously, I'm not the only person to think that, as Rox, a very popular modder, has created a Runeforge mechanic, as you can see over here on screen. It'll be linked in the description below in case you want to try it out for yourselves, but it works in a very similar way. Instead of using spirits, you use oath gold, but the concept is still very much the same. It still says blessings and curses. Keep in mind that replacing UI does take some time because it's not just coding and obviously basic modding, but it's also art creation and so on. Now, I've been speaking about a need of rune forging for a long time through a multitude of different videos, as it's something that's very much attached to the Dwarfs. It's something that you could do on the tabletop too, as you could tailor your actual runes to be exactly what you need. The system that was put into place into Total War Warhammer, that of just basically making magic, is alright, but it does also feel like, yeah, it feels kind of small compared to what could be the possibility here. So with the Witch's Hut being interesting in its own right, how could it be changed around to be, for the Dwarfs, be very unique but still very much use the framework? I've got a few ideas, and hopefully Creative Assembly likes these ideas, as I'm not trying to say that I can come up with better ideas, it's just I have a lot of tabletop knowledge, and, well, I mean, you guys have seen them in the community tab. Recently, I just sorted out like 200 and something dwarfs for Old World, so I am dwarfed up lately. I am honestly dwarfed up. So first up, we just have to talk about the baseline mechanic. Yeah, you've got 4 slots. Really, the Dwarfs only had 3, I believe, but I understand why they put 4. It just looks visually nicer, so I'd be fine with them going with 4. Same thing with all the ingredients. I like the concept of having different ones everywhere, so you've got inscriptions, rituals, glyphs, gromril, all the usual stuff that you would expect that the Dwarfs would have access to. However, I don't like the idea of you need to go fight an Empire faction or ally up with an Empire faction, fight the ogres, and so on. While it's good for a hex point of view for Mother Ostankya, it's not really good for the Dwarfs. Instead, the Dwarfs could do it in a different way where, first up, technology would need to be reworked into different like sectors and guilds and so on, very similar to that of the Chaos Dwarfs, because the current tech tree is absolutely atrocious, but if it was separated into guilds, you'll be able to find them as you naturally progress. Progress through an engineer's guild technology line and you'd be getting materials and maybe anvil pieces, stuff that would make sense to put into runes. Progress through a religious guild, which will get you stuff like, I don't know, inscriptions, ritual pieces, actual rune pieces themselves, like core stuff, right? Because the way I would see it is that the rune pieces would be separated into primary and secondary, and then finally, you've already seen that we're on the buildings. There could be masterpieces of runes which could be found in certain areas, so you'd have to go to historic places for the Dwarfs and pick those up. That would give you, the player, incentive to travel around and go to separate Karaks, lost Karaks for example, down here in the southern World's Edge Mountains. Obviously you'd want to get Karaza Karak, Karak Kadrin, and pretty much any other places which are just like really important to the Dwarfs. So you would have the separation of technology for the main pieces. This is stuff that you would already be using naturally, and then going to all the different locations to kind of supercharge them. This is where the runes would become Master Runeforge, so even more powerful than the usual ones. It's just an extra little bit here and there. I think that's making sense so far, just as a basic framework, but obviously we'd have to start looking towards the runes themselves. Now, it wouldn't be 100% identical to the Witches thing, where you get blessing and curses. Here it would be separated to offensive and defensive runes, and you would only be able to put them on your own troops, as it just kind of makes sense like that, right? You could make them offensive to do a bit of extra damage, increase your speed, all the usual stuff that you would attribute to offensive stats. If turned into a mastercrafted version, it would even have a offensive ability, only to be able to be used once, and the defensive runes, well, the usual stuff: increase melee defense, increase vigor, anything to do with defensive abilities and defensive stats. Again, given an ability if it's mastercrafted, and there you go. It takes something that's already been implemented and reskinned, but also into a different way. And it's something that we know Creative Assembly are quite keen on doing. They've said it themselves, they don't mind reusing mechanics, it's very obvious there, but if you can take a mechanic, reuse it, and just make it something completely different while still feeling exactly the same, in a certain sense, obviously, that's honestly quite good. It shows that there is a level of foresight for these types of things, and I think that it could help the dwarfs very heavily. I know some people are going to say, well, what about all the runesmiths and stuff, the ones that you already have in game that use the runes as magic? Well, that's perfectly fine. You could still have them there as abilities. Thankfully, the tabletop had a large amount of those types of runes. What could be done is you've got the normal heroes and lords with these abilities, and should you decide to make mastercrafted runes in the Runeforge, well, you'll get those abilities as one-off items that you can use with other units, just in case you're lacking those abilities with your armies. And yes, I know in the tabletop, the mastercrafted runes were kind of unique, but this is Total War, this is a sandbox, so they can kind of, you know, go against that for a bit. Even I agree that in some cases, yes, gameplay should trump lore, and I think this makes a lot of sense. It allows you to have a lot more versatile dwarves, making them a lot better in battle, as, yeah, come on, with the dwarfs you're mostly just staying still and firing, so having some abilities will be kind of useful to you. Obviously this doesn't fix all the issues with the dwarfs, we'll likely talk about a dwarf rework idea in the future, but I'm just wanting to throw out some ideas to Creative Assembly just in case they're thinking about the dwarfs, because one thing that Shadows of Change did do is kind of update some quality of life stuff for, you know, like Kislev, Zinj, and Grand Cafe, but it really didn't add in mechanics or change mechanics, barring Harmony. This would require a lot more work than the Harmony stuff, I imagine. I'm not too sure, I haven't gone into the database to see how that could be changed around, but the idea is sometimes reusing mechanics is quite good, and I honestly believe that this would be a great system for the dwarves, just to give them a little bit more of a push here and there, you know? Having a little bit of fun is always great. Giving something that is lore friendly but also doesn't break gameplay is also really, really good. So let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Let's start a bit of a discussion. I just want to look about stuff potentially in the future in a more positive light, because while I could stay and choose to be negative all the time, I am hoping that Creative Assembly are listening to the fanbase and just taking stuff into account for future content and just fixing things in general, you know? We had a hotfix quite early on, so yeah. Hopefully we'll just keep getting hotfixes to fix all the issues, and it shows that they are listening. But yeah, have a good day guys, and I'll see you all again very, very soon.